Welcome to the Beer and Pretzel Podcast, your host for one-shot role-playing games. My name's Austin.
And this is Travis.
And we're here with Luciella Scarlett, the author of Fight Bears, Cough Blood, Kill God, and other role-playing games. Thank you very much for coming on our show, by the way.
Thank you very much for having me.
We want to talk to you about this game, but also other role-playing games you've been a part of. But something I always ask role-playing game authors and creators at the beginning is that making role-playing games is a very artistic talent, but unlike other things, there's not a set path necessarily into game creation. Like with, I went to school for film, and with that, there's kind of a set path to getting into film for most directors or filmmakers out there, with some variations, of course, but everyone we talk to who's made really awesome and creative role-playing games have their own unique way of how they got into this field. So would you mind kind of telling us about how you got into role-playing games in general, but mostly about game creation itself and like how you got to this point that you want to make your own games?
So I started off playing, as I think a lot of people get into role-playing games, through Dungeons and Dragons. So played for a while, GM'd for a while, and I actually ended up writing Dungeons and Dragons content and publishing on DM's Guild. A little while later, I played my first indie RPG, which was Honey Heist, I believe, which is a fantastic one-page RPG, and so different from Dungeons and Dragons, which is something like 700 pages, I think, total.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. So that's part of, I think, what really drew me into indie gaming is the fact that I have a short attention span. And indie RPGs, well, not all of them, but a lot of them tend to be a bit shorter, a bit easier to pick up. And in terms of how I started writing games, how I moved from Dungeons and Dragons to writing my own games, just sort of happened one day, I think, sort of what you're saying for other designers. Joined a few game jams, and I think the thing with itch.io or self-publishing games is it's actually really easy to get started. The entry barrier is very, very low. It's hard to do well as a designer, but it's not hard to get started at all.
And how long have you been creating your own games, or I guess playing role-playing games in general too?
It's probably been at least 3 or 4 years now that I've been writing my own games. Playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, probably been playing that for up to 10 years total, on and off. And before that, I guess probably even before Dungeons & Dragons, Murder Mystery Parties would have been my first role-playing games, and that was a big hit when I was a teenager.
It's funny that you mentioned Honey Heist. Honey Heist is actually like one of the first role-playing games we played on this podcast, and Grant Howitt was like the first or second game creator that we talked to.
I think he was the first.
Yeah, that game's a blast. It's actually also the first indie games I picked up because I played it in college. At that time, we were just playing Dungeons and Dragons. I guess I wasn't cultured enough to see the many, many awesome games out there. But
we're also playing Deadlands as well.
Oh, that's true. I was playing Deadlands. But picking up Honey Heist is like, it's like a 1 or 2 page RPG, like you said, very different than D&D about bears doing a heist where they steal honey and they wear a variety of hats, which is hilarious. Speaking of which, a lot of the role-playing games you have on your Itch channel have very, really awesome titles, like, of course, Fight Bears, Cough Blood, Kill God, and then you have, like, a wretched lunchathon with your best friend who sucks at cooking. With these awesome titles that go to fun games, do you come up with the titles before or after creating the role-playing game?
It depends on the specific game. Yeah, the titles just sort of come to me, and a lot of the time I'm just choosing the first thing that comes to my head. So there's not really a lot of thought that goes into those, but somehow it works out.
So my first question is going to be, I'm going to agree with you. I kind of have a short attention span, which is why I like Dungeons & Dragons, but I don't like character creation because it takes forever. But this game was pretty simple. I enjoyed building the characters. It was, what, 3-4 questions?
Well, I think I gave you 3 or 4 questions, but,
but I'm saying per person.
Yeah, in total, I think on the document it's like 8 or so, but
yeah, it's a few for you, a few for me, and a few for the
enemy.
The antagonist, yeah. So, I mean, how did you kind of come up with that idea? Because I loved it.
Yeah, to go off what Travis was saying, it was kind of fun because Travis had a set of questions that he answered. I had my own. Even me and him came together to create the enemies' questions and answers. So together we made our own characters, but also we worked on the enemy who we eventually fought at the end. So yeah, me and him really loved the character creation for your game.
Yeah, I'm going to answer a lot of these questions by sort of referring to other people's indie games. The influence behind the questions sort of process was probably For the Queen, or a lot of those sort of story games where, because this game primarily is a story game. It's not as much like an action game like Dungeons and Dragons. It's about telling a story. So For the Queen is one where there is no upfront character creation step. You just go through that game learning more about your character as you go. And I really like that as a process of generating a character, because you really are just figuring out your own character in response to those questions.
With this game, Fight Bears, Cough Blood, Kill God, to kind of go back to my question about naming it, it's this game and Bigfoot Stole My Best Friend's Birthday Present in My Car are the best titles for role-playing games that we've played. To go off my earlier question, did you come up with this before or afterwards, and how do you come up with that really great title?
Yeah, I think that for this specific game, I think the title came after the concept, and just sort of, yeah, I mean, like I said, a lot of the time I am naming things impulsively. It's just whatever sort of comes into my head. And this were 3 things that came into my head, which I just sort of slapped together, because I think that title has a really nice rhythm to it. It's very sort of blunt, just it tells you exactly what the game is about, right?
No, it really does, yeah. We get right down to the point. Yeah, I love it.
We didn't fight any bears. Austin was a little disappointed.
Oh, that's true. I should have had some Arctic bears.
We went on your website and we saw a few of the games you've created so far. And I was wondering, do you have a particular favorite game that you've created or worked on?
Definitely the favorite, and I think also the most polished game that I have created is called Cage of Sand, which is a time loop horror game for minimum 1 player, but you can really play it with as many people as you like. This one's another storytelling game, but a very different tone. And to a certain extent, it's not even a role-playing game in a sense that you're not taking on individual roles. You're telling a story by drawing cards. And how it works is essentially, like I said, it's a time loop horror game. So you meet a bunch of characters. A bunch of characters die. The time resets itself and you forget most of what happened. Or your character forgets most of what happened. But as players, you have to figure out what are the common patterns here. As this loop is repeating itself, slightly different things happening each time. And like I said, as players, you're trying to figure out and make a story out of it. And that really stems from things like drawing the same cards repeatedly. And again, in responding to certain prompts. So that would definitely be my favorite game that I've written so far. But like I said, totally different tone to this one.
So by time loop, do you mean kind of like Groundhog Day in that everything like loops back after you die?
Yeah, like Groundhog Day. The inspiration for this one probably more Higurashi and Umineko, or the When They Cry series, which is another anime. Because unlike Groundhog Day, where everything, well, I mean, the horror in that is the fact that the time is repeating itself. The horror in this is both the fact that time is repeating itself and a lot of people are dying, and you don't know why. So it is really a game about helplessness, and you as the player get to decide, does the character ever escape from that, and what are the conditions of their escape, or are they stuck there forever? So I think you can form really interesting stories out of it, and it also works in a lot of different settings. So played it in like a cruise ship setting, played it in like a 1950s rich family living in a mansion setting. I've done one which was space opera, which was interesting.
Huh.
So yeah.
Well, that sounds pretty fun. And when I was at work earlier, I was looking into your games, and when I was reading to Cage of Sand, because on your website it says that's the game that for you is most popular with people, and I was like, oh, that's such a cool idea, a time loop horror game. I see that you also made this into a you gave it a license so people could take the game mechanics and put it for their own games. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So there is an SRD for that, system reference document. So yeah, and that license is totally free. So you can go and download that one and play with it and make whatever games you like using very similar mechanics.
Oh, that's cool. Because the last people we just talked to on this podcast, Vincent and Meg Baker, who created the Powered by the Apocalypse system, of course, they did something very similar that's been spawned off into many other role-playing games. So what was it about this that you decided that, hey, instead of just kind of using it for this game, it might be interesting to see what other people will do with my game system? What kind of led you to go, hey, I'll try to create this license so people can use this same system for their own games?
Just really curiosity to see if other people do use it to create anything. One of my friends, or another game designer I know, created the system called The Wretched, or sorry, that's the original game is called The Wretched. Just trying to remember what the actual game system born from that is called. Whoops. And that one, he did a full sort of game jam where people could actually create their own games off that. I actually participated in that and made another game, which is, so the original, the Wretched game is definitely horror, and you're stuck in this basically hopeless situation with a very, very small chance of success. And so it is very much a horror game. So, but I took that and made this comedy game where your friend is trying to cook you a nice lunch and definitely burning down the kitchen. That's kind of the fun of creating licenses, is that you don't know what people are going to create from them. So I have no idea if anyone's actually touched this license yet, to be honest, but it would be very cool if they did.
Our scenario for the game was it was kind of an Ice Age type early humans.
Yeah, Primal inspired.
Yeah, we started off Primal. I was wondering, what are some good ones, or just any that you've heard of for different scenarios people have come up with for this game that you liked or maybe didn't like?
Or ones that you've played yourself. Like, what we really liked about this was that it's so open. We spent like 15, 20 minutes, actually probably longer than that, debating what premise to do for this game, because it's very open-ended of what you can kind of do, as long as you can come up with a cool like location, a master, a novice. Yeah, so like what you said, Travis, like what else have you heard of people doing, or ones you've done yourself?
To my mind, it works very well in wilderness settings, where you can sort of go in a lot of different locations. I really liked your Ice Age setting. I thought that was fantastic. So to be honest, that's probably one of my favorites.
Hey, good job, Travis.
We picked a good one.
Yeah. I've also seen, I think the original playtest for this one from last year was actually in more of a sort of city setting, or kind of post-apocalyptic city setting. So it does work in a few different settings, but I did really like yours.
So with Fight Bears, Cough Blood, Kill God, you list like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Dragon Ball as like the anime inspirations for this game of a master training the novice, and eventually he gets strong enough where he can fight the antagonist. Besides anime, which is listed on the document, do you have any other inspirations that aren't anime, either live action movies or books or video games?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm very much an anime person. Video games as well, I think, is where the Kill God aspect really comes in. But definitely, I mean, I've heard that Kung Fu Panda is one of the that's actually, I don't think I've personally seen that movie, but that seems to be the one that people sort of jump to in terms of like what they think of when they hear that title and read what the game is about. For me, though, I'm just very much an anime lover, and I built this game off a lot of like the content that I consumed when I was growing up. So stuff that is sort of in the back of my mind, even not things I'd been watching shortly before writing it.
Yeah, and I think when we were playing, I think, Travis, you made the comparison to Kung Fu Panda, and I thought like it was a good example of like what the Karate Kid was.
Yes. Yeah, that one. Both those movies are good examples, but as you said, a lot of anime does this. I've seen at least a few now.
Yeah, because Travis is huge into anime too, so you're probably the master of this too as well. You kind of got
I'm
this.
not huge into anime. I'm slightly above you.
All right, that's fair. I don't know. You've been watching what's that one show, Bleach, the 1,000 episode show?
Oh, One Piece.
One Piece, yeah.
Well over 1,000 episodes.
Yeah.
I think Bleach just got up there, but yeah.
Oh, wow.
I've started Bleach.
So next question for you, Travis. Do you got anything?
So this is quite clearly a two-person kind of role-playing game where one plays a novice, one plays both kind of the sensei and the antagonist. Did you ever consider trying to make this or making a game similar to this that could be played by multiple people? Like it'd be almost maybe either multiple students or a couple students and a couple masters or something?
I think it could work, but I mean, when I was designing this game, I always saw it as a two-player game and very much sort of those two roles. And I guess the inspiration for this game was originally a jam theme, which was an unexpected alliance. And the first thing that came into my head was really that bond between the master and the novice. So in my head, it's always been two players. But I mean, you probably could adjust this game to have more than two players. It's just, in my mind, it's always been about that specific kind of relationship.
On your website, because with our podcast, we like playing indie-made role-playing games, and especially games that are very easy to pick up. Doesn't necessarily have to be a one-page role-playing game, but easy enough to pick up, which was great for this game. What other role-playing games would you recommend for us to try, let's say, besides Cage of Sand? Because that is a game just off the premise alone I want to try on this podcast. And Brad, who's normally on this show, his game store has a lot of tarot cards, so we have plenty of choices for good tarot card decks to play this game with. So besides that, what other role-playing games would you suggest we try out on this podcast for good one-shot role-playing games?
Yours or somebody else's.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll suggest one of mine just because it's at the top of my head, and then I'll probably give you a few other suggestions. So, A Wretched Luncheon with Your Best Friend Who Sucks at Cooking.
That was a very good title.
This one, yeah, it's technically it's playable as you can play it as one person. It can be a one-player game or it can be a two-player game. And if you play it as a two-player game, essentially you have one person in the kitchen pretending they're not burning down the kitchen, and you have one person sitting in the dining room watching TV and pretending they're not aware of the kitchen burning down. So I think that could be a fun one for you to play. In terms of story games, if you haven't tried it yet, For the Queen is fantastic. It's zero prep. It's so easy to get started. You can play this game with people who have never played an RPG before. I would recommend that as like a fantastic starter game. Essentially, you just go back and forth asking questions and building out your characters and figuring out, so that the final sort of the end to For the Queen is you have to decide whether you will defend the Queen against attackers or whether you will let her die is pretty much the end of that game. And in order to get to that point, you're figuring out your character's motivations and how they feel about the Queen. So that one is a really fantastic game. I definitely recommend that one.
Because we just mentioned this, how long does you think it would take you normally to finish a whole game? Like for most of your average games that you've done, like how long do you think the overall process would take?
Oh, this is going to be another one where I answer it depends. For Fight Bears, Cough Blood, Kill God, that was actually created for a game jam. So the original draft of it was really only done in a few hours, to be honest. If I include sort of the layout and editing and all of that stuff, probably took about a day to get a first version of that game. Now, I went back and edited some additional items into it and made some changes to it, so that added on a few hours. But to be honest, that one was done very, very quickly. Some games might take me weeks. And the word count doesn't necessarily determine how long a game sort of takes to create. So it's, to a certain extent, it's how much energy you have at the time. To a certain extent, it's whether certain mechanics are easy to, like, whether they come to your mind quickly or if you sort of had to really think about them. So Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on the specific game. What I will say is most of my games are relatively short. They're anywhere from sort of 1 page to 10 pages. Some of them might be slightly longer than that, but I'm not writing the next D&D. I'm writing short indie games that are easy to pick up.
When you're not working or working on your own role-playing games, like when you have time to either DM or play other people's role-playing games as a player, what games do you play? Is it mostly Dungeons and Dragons, or do you sometimes join other people's campaigns of a different role-playing game?
Oh, to be honest, I don't really play any campaign games these days. I really like sort of RPGs that you can just pick up and play with no prep work. And finish it during the session. So, yeah, I play a lot of sort of different indie RPGs. Actually, there's another one you would like is Bleak Spirit. I played relatively recently, which you can play with 2 players as well. That one's another horror game, or not horror, sorry. I would say dark fantasy. And again, very much story-based. You can finish it in a single session. I don't actually remember the last time I played a campaign, but yeah, it's just really nice, I think, these days to not have that pressure of having to prepare and having to make sure everyone's available at the same time on a regular basis.
It's like getting cats into a bag, so trying to get enough people to consistently show up to play a campaign game. That's why.
Yeah, it's always fun.
We have a group of 4, and that's difficult.
Yeah.
Or 5 if you include Austin.
Honestly, that's why I want to make this podcast, was just playing one-shot role-playing games are great because you don't have to put a lot of time into them necessarily, or you can, but just games are easy to pick up and play and pretty fun of different kinds of genres, which is always great, not just one genre that you're playing for months on end. So my last question would be, for game creators out there, or I guess inspiring game creators out there, as a game creator yourself, what are some tips or tricks that you would give anyone who is like actually thinking about getting into game creation?
First tip is just go for it, because like I said, I mean, it's hard to do well in game design in terms of actually making an income out of your game design, but getting started is so easy. So there's no reason not to do it. One thing that I would suggest is visit itch.io, both in terms of actually checking out the games that are already available there, because, I mean, other designers really are your major source of inspiration. The other thing that you can do is join game jams, and they will often have a prompt. You will often be able to chat with other creators and get some feedback as you go. So that's a really good way to get started. And I'll say as well, most indie game devs are actually quite happy to have a conversation with you around design. I mean, be reasonable, don't expect huge amounts of labor, but if you're just wanting to have a conversation, we're generally, I would say, pretty approachable.
Yeah, that's something that I really love about the role-playing game community, is that everyone is so open to trying their role-playing games and testing them out with each other. It's a very welcoming and open community. So thank you very much, Luciella, for coming on our podcast. Where can people, we mentioned your Itch channel, but where can people find you just on social media, but also where can they find your more importantly, your games?
You can find me on Twitter and Itch at Luciella ES. That's LucieLlaes. My pinned tweet has a bunch of links in it. And Itch, as I said, is just that again, .itch.io. So, yeah, definitely check out my stuff and feel free to say hello.
Awesome. And once again, thank you very much for coming on our show and talking role-playing games and this role-playing game with us that we just played.
Thank you very much for having me. And
for everyone that's listened, I will be putting a link to Luciella's Twitter. She's got a great Twitter page right there, and her Itch channel also, drive-through role-playing game. I found some cool Dungeons & Dragons adventures that you wrote, including, I don't want to give away the title for it because Travis is going to be playing it in, say, 20 minutes or so, but we're going to be playing one of your games tonight, actually.
Oh, awesome. Hope you have fun.
Yes, thank you. And for everyone listening, check out the links below that I just mentioned if you guys want to check out more of the awesome games that she has. And for next time, we're going to be playing... What are we playing next time, Travis? We're playing Heavy Metal Thunder Mouse.
Yeah, the second edition of this, because we played it as our original...
Our first game many months ago, actually,
first episode.
Like a year or two ago. But yeah, Heavy Metal Thunder Mouse is next, and we are going to be talking to the creator on that podcast as well. Thanks for everyone listening, and we'll hear from you next time on the Beer and Pretzel Podcast.
Thank you.